Welcome to the Property Investors YouTube channel, which I believe to be the richest, rawest and realest property resource on the whole of the internet. So just hit subscribe right now, right below, and join the family. So Tim, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here with us at the Hilton Hall. You're known as the property finance coach.
That's correct, yeah. Thanks, Samuel. Thanks very much for inviting me here.
No.
It's a real pleasure. Thanks very much.
It is a pleasure. Thanks for coming down. We've known each other a few years now.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Why don't you start by just explaining what the property finance coach means?
So the property finance coach, I identified that one of the biggest blockers that people in property investing were experiencing was the lack of finance. There were lots of courses on helping people how to adapt various strategies, but there was very little advice on actually how to work with investors. So I thought that's an area that I can help and really add value to. So that's kind of how that came about.
That's great, fantastic. And you're an investor yourself?
I'm an investor myself, yeah. I have a very small portfolio of just single-let properties, but aside from that, I also do joint ventures with other people. And yeah, there's been some interesting learnings on the way, but those learnings are great for being able to help other people.
So do you think that you can start off with no money and through joint ventures and raising finance, you can build a large property portfolio and become financially independent, starting with nothing?
Starting with nothing. I did slightly better than that when I started. I didn't just have no money, I had about £100,000 through a project that didn't quite work out.
Oh, goodness.
So you might say I was quite motivated to make something work for me. Yeah. So yes, absolutely, you can start with nothing or less than nothing. And even if you've got money, at some point you're going to run out. So working with investors is an absolutely key part to growing your property portfolio.
Yeah, because of course, if you're borrowing someone else's money to do a deal, then you're getting an infinite return on investment.
Absolutely, and one of the key things working with investors is understanding the kind of deals that you need to be doing that will work for investors. I had a meeting just before I came here, and we were talking about the kind of deals that would actually work, because one of the keys of working investors, they want to know how they're going to get their money back. So it's not like working with your own money where it may be okay to leave some of the money in. It's preferable if you can get all of your money out and you've got a strategy for being able to do that. So I'm going to be asking you lots of questions and picking your brain, and hopefully we'll be delving in and learning a lot of information about practically how to find these deals and how to get the finance. But before we do that, why don't you start just by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you ended up getting into property in the first place? How I ended up getting into property? Well, that's an interesting thing. I ran the New York Marathon in 2011, aged 50, and I came back from that thinking, boy, I've been able to achieve that. It's quite an achievement. It was the third marathon that I'd run, and came back really inspired and thought, at the time I was a garden designer, a successful garden designer, and loving doing that work and helping people transform their gardens. But I realised that when I had my pension valued, and they said, Tim, congratulations, your pension's going to be worth about £5,000. And I said, £5,000 a month is fine. And they said, no, Tim, it's not a month, it's a year, and that's in 15 years' time. So I thought, great, okay. So I couldn't carry on with the horticulture because I'd literally been digging my own grave, and that didn't really appeal. So I thought, let's start exploring what the options are. And when I came back from New York, I got involved with all sorts of internet marketing and get-rich-quick schemes, and actually one of those led me to what was at the time the Wiltshire Property Meet, and we were there to present the internet marketing idea, but actually I fell in love with the property and saw that there was far more legs, if you like, to that as a proposition for a long term than ever some of these kind of harem scarum internet schemes that were about at the time. So it was kind of, just understanding that I needed to do something. I needed to create a legacy for my children. I needed to create that time freedom for me to be able to go and enjoy my life.
Yeah, that's great. So what, you run a marathon, you thought, I'm unstoppable.
Yes, pretty much.
You then checked out your pension and realised it sucked.
Yes.
As most people do realise that have pensions.
Yeah.
You wanted to leave a legacy, so you tried a few things, and then you ended up in property.
Yeah.
Great. And that was when you were 50, and how old are you now, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 56.
6 years ago.
6 years ago that was. So.
And what would you say in the last 6 years would be your greatest achievement in property?
My greatest achievement has to be that I've raised around about £2.5 million in private investor finance.
Incredible.
Which is, I'm being very modest about it. It was something I had to do in a way, but it's taught me a lot of lessons about how to work with other people. And it is quite an achievement to have done that, particularly when you look at the time I was leveraging other people's experience and their knowledge and their skill. So, when people come to me and say, well, I haven't got money, I said, well, I started with minus 100. I didn't at that time have necessarily all the experience, but I was working with other people and leveraging that in order to achieve that level of success.
Well, people would tell you that it was impossible, really, wouldn't they? If you're, in your 50s and you're starting out with less than nothing, you're 100 grand in debt. The idea of raising 2.5 million to invest in property and become a property investor would be a pipe dream for most people. What would you say, Tim, to somebody who said starting out in property with no money and raising finance and all that, it's risky, it's dodgy, it's hard, and it's just a pipe dream and it's not going to work?
Yeah, it is all of those things. It is risky, it is dodgy, it is hard work. I had an email just before I came here, one of my clients, feeling a bit disheartened. You need to be persistent, you need to understand what you're doing, you need to get a real feeling for the numbers, what works for you, why it's a good deal, because if you don't, you will potentially fall foul of the many traps and things that you can fall into with property. And I think we all acknowledge that there are risks attached with property. It's any investment of any description carries risks. It's understanding those risks and how to mitigate them, and particularly when you're working with private investors, you've really got to understand them and be able to communicate them effectively with your investors so that they understand what they're letting themselves in for.
Absolutely.
And how you're mitigating those risks by taking steps and understanding what the risks are. Somebody who says there are no risks involved in property, run a mile very quickly. Maybe 26.2 miles, maybe run the marathon.
I think it's about having the financial intelligence to limit those risks and prevent anything from happening. But of course, you've always got some level of risk. Even when you drive a car, you might crash. So
the thing about that is nobody expects you to know everything about every aspect of any property deal. So it's cool to be working with other people who've got that knowledge and that expertise. And we highly recommend that people have expert legal advice, that they have legal tax accounting, particularly specific for property, so that they're getting the best advice from the best people, and also to kind of work with people who've got the experience and got the knowledge, who've maybe made a few mistakes. One of my coaches shared with me that I'd learn nothing from his successes but everything from his failures. Because when things go right, you don't know where the boundaries are, you don't know what the limits are, where the limits are. Kids are great at this because they push the boundaries the whole time. They push the envelopes to see what's possible. And yeah, they fall over and they hurt themselves, and of course as adults we pick them up and dust them down, and you know, you wouldn't know about parenthood just yet, but I gather that's coming your way very soon. So good luck with that.
Thank you so much, Tim. What would you say then to somebody, because I have guys like this all the time, they'll learn how to do HMOs or get a really high return on investment, and they'll do a couple of deals, but then suddenly of course they're limited because they run out of finance. They're thinking, what on earth can I do? And there are options, lease option agreements, and there are no money down ways you can do it. But raising finance, if you know how to take 40 grand and turn that into a generating 10 grand a year, but you haven't got the 40 grand, surely it makes sense to borrow it off somebody, give them back a small percentage, and then you keep the rest and have the property as well. I've done that myself, not on the same level to what you've done it, but I've borrowed a couple £100,000. What advice would you give to somebody who was wanting to do that but didn't have anyone that was there to give them the money, didn't know what the right paperwork was, just didn't, how would they go about that?
How do they go about it? Well, we work on what I call the 4 Ps of raising private finance. So there are 4 key elements to raising finance. So that's the people aspect of it, and property is very much about people. We also need to understand the project, we need to understand the paperwork side of things, and we need to understand the PR. And the way I kind of share this with people is that people in the UK have a real problem about asking for money, and it's this real kind of blocker that, you know, I'm going to be asking for money, and it's not about that at all. It's not the Oliver syndrome where, you know, please sir, can I have some more? This is about creating an opportunity, presenting an opportunity, and making it attractive. And the story that I tell is about attracting butterflies into a garden. Having come from a horticultural background, you know, there's several ways you can catch a butterfly. You can stand in a garden with a butterfly net. You can wait for a butterfly to fly over, and you can run around the garden, chase after it, and hope you catch it. That's a way. It's a bit random. You know, you might not end up with the kind of butterfly that you want. If you want cabbage whites, planting cabbages in your garden will attract them in droves, because it's what they want to be able to lay their eggs for their you know, the caterpillars to be able to feed, to grow, to become butterflies. Cabbage whites aren't terribly exciting, so maybe you want something a bit more exotic, a bit more exciting, perhaps like a red admiral or a painted lady, and you plant perhaps a buddleia, which will attract them in droves. So you haven't got to run around chasing after them. You're creating the environment that's attractive to the kind of people that you want to be working with as investors.
That's a great analogy. On a practical level, what would that look like, wanting to attract somebody who's got 100 grand in the bank? What would that look like?
So sharing your story and resonating with those people. So understanding what their problems are, you know, and particularly at the moment, interest rates are pretty much still at an all-time low. So if they've got money sitting in a bank, it's earning them probably less than 1%. You know, when you've got inflation taken into account, it's actually costing them money to have that money sitting in a bank account or a building society. So understanding the pain that they're feeling by having that money sitting there not working for them, and conveying that as a message, and showing them that they can safely invest in property, working with somebody who knows what they're doing, or is working with somebody that knows what they're doing, you know, allows them then to explore those possibilities. And there's plenty of money out there. I think this is the big myth, you know. I get asked all the time, you know, well, who's got money? Well, I'm sorry, they don't walk down the street with a whopping great flag saying, hey, I've got 100 grand stashed in the bank, you know, come and mug me. You know, it's just not happening. So, you know, and quite often the guys who've got the outward symbols of success, whatever that means, you know, the big house, the flash car, the expensive holidays, you know, they're not necessarily the guys that have got money who want to invest it, because they've spent it all on their toys. That's perhaps a bit of a broad generalisation.
So how do you attract them? What share your success on Facebook? What do you do?
I use Facebook. I've probably had the greatest success on LinkedIn.
Right. Give me an example. You put a LinkedIn post or you
LinkedIn post, just shared that I was doing a particular project, shared the outline details of that project.
Brilliant.
Got to be a bit careful these days because the FCA, obviously the rules and regulations about how you can promote investment opportunities. So again, you've got to be a bit careful with that. But there are ways
So effectively, that's a really good practical thing. So you post on LinkedIn and you say, I've got this deal, and you do it not in a silly way, but just, just for the record, I'm working on this project now and it's generating some nice income. Yeah. Have a nice day all. And then you're going to have people saying, I'm interested in that kind of thing. Yeah. What's the next step?
But one of the ways of doing it and to getting greater, some people come to me and say, well, I've only got maybe 100 contacts, relatively few contacts in this day of, being able to connect so easily. They're not out there, and they haven't perhaps got lots of contacts at the moment. But it's not just appealing to those 100; it's their contacts as well. So you're leveraging not just the finance, but you're leveraging people, and it's presenting an opportunity in such a way that's asking the question: who else might be involved in this? Who do you know who might also be interested in this as an opportunity? Because quite a lot of the cash that I've brought in has come from people that I'd never met before, that I wasn't connected to.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
And £200,000 at a time in some instances from people that I maybe, they were signing it off before they'd actually even met me, because I created that correct environment, the environment that resonated with them. It provided a solution for what they were looking for at the time, and it met with their requirements. So it was sort of a no-brainer for them.
No, it's brilliant. So you've got the 4 Ps. So you've got the project.
Yeah.
And presumably that's not something that you particularly teach or specialise in too much?
It's not something I specialise in, but what I do encourage people to do is to really understand the numbers.
Yeah.
And the key, particularly when you're working with investors, is the exit strategy, and not just to have one exit strategy. It might be your number one strategy is to keep the property so you can build your portfolio, but actually, in reality, it may be that you can't refinance it to quite the level that you wanted to, because you don't have control over the revaluation for the mortgage. So you might end up having to sell it in order to exit, but you need to understand that that's
when you're using other people's money, you definitely need lots of exit strategies.
And one of the exits may be that, for that particular investor, that actually you bring another investor on board, and as long as you're one of the big words that all investors talk about is transparency. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for no little hidden surprises that they're suddenly going to find kind of creeping out at the woodwork. They accept that there's risk. They want to know what the risks are. They want to understand that you're managing them. Absolutely. And that's really critical to getting the whole thing sorted out.
So once you've got the project and you've got people approaching you saying, I'm interested, what do we do? The next P is the paperwork. So give us just a summary on how to go about getting paperwork.
So my preference, particularly at the moment, is to work with loan agreements rather than doing joint ventures. Now, don't get me wrong, there is a time and place for joint ventures, but they're much more complicated. A blank sheet of paper is effectively a joint venture agreement, and you can write on it whatever you want, and that's a joint venture agreement. And you need, if you're working with other people's money for joint ventures, they've got to, through, again, the FCA rules and regulations, they've got to be either high net worth individuals or sophisticated investors. So you've got to get, people signed off to say that they are who they say they are, and they've got that level of experience to go into. What I've also heard is that I think something like 80% of all joint ventures don't work. They fail to meet the expectations of both parties that are involved with a project. And that's because people don't tend to get through to the nitty-gritty before they start kind of going on and doing the project. They jump into bed together without really understanding, well, what happens when things don't go quite according to plan.
Yeah.
There's no exit strategy, there's no plan, there's no kind of grievance procedure for how you handle that. A loan agreement, by contrast, is a very simple document because you're borrowing an agreed amount of money, for example, £100,000. You're borrowing it for a fixed length of time, typically maybe 12 months, perhaps 2 years, depending on what's agreeable with the investor. And you've got probably a fixed rate of return. So there's no argument about any of it. Yeah. It's plain and simple, it's in black and white, there's nothing to argue about. The bigger the JV agreement that you've got, the more opportunity there is for a lawyer to say, I'm sorry, we don't agree with that, or we've interpreted this in a slightly different way.
Yeah. What kind of return on investment would you typically give your clients?
Depends a little bit on what the project is and what it will stand.
What you can afford to
what you can afford to give,
and that's 8% was a good benchmark.
That's pretty good in terms of typically between 6 and 8%. You've got to look at what people would be expecting outside of property. So if they were looking at other investments, what kind of would be on a par with the levels of risk attached to it. So 6 to 8% would be my kind of target benchmark.
And then finally, Tim, what do you mean by PR?
PR, okay. So we talked about transparency with investors, and it's just PR is investor relations. But I couldn't think of anything else beginning with P to make the 4 Ps, so we came up with investor relations or PR. And it's just keeping them informed and, acknowledging that there are problems, just keeping them informed, sharing with them the progress, how you're getting on, what's going on with the project, what issues you found, how you're solving the problems that have come up, and just keeps them engaged. So, if you've got an investor that's working with you for a year or maybe 2 years, they don't want you to just disappear off the planet the minute you've got their cash. They want to be kept informed, they want to be kept abreast of what's happening with a particular project and stuff. So it's really just keeping them sweet and acknowledging that there are challenges that do arise in property, and how you're managing those.
What do you do if you've got a hard, fast, tight agreement with somebody on a personal loan, and the deal goes problematic and you lose the investor's money? What happens then?
Yeah, that's where you've got things like personal guarantees. You have maybe some sort of security that
exit strategies, I guess.
Exit strategies. Yes, it's possible to lose people's money. I think people need to be aware of that. But if you've done your due diligence properly and you're not doing anything that's super risky, of course it's never say never, but if you do it properly and you've really done your due diligence properly, the incidence of that's happening.
It's so small. I guess even if you've got money in the bank can go bust and you can lose a lot of money.
I mean it's understanding what the risks are and being prepared to work with them. And again, if you've got a good relationship with the investor and they understand the risks and understand what your exit strategies are, and they've asked the right questions, then you should be cool with it.
Yeah, that's great. And you're coming down today. You're going to be speaking at the Property Investors Circle tonight.
Yes, excited about that.
What are you going to be talking about tonight?
I'm going to be talking about how people can start with nothing and raise private finance from armchair investors for property.
That's great. And you've got a book coming out as well?
I've got a book coming out later this year. Which is called How to Attract Armchair Investors for Property. And
how can we reserve the book?
It's by contacting me. So that's Tim at propertyfinance.coach, and I'd be happy to put you on the list and alert you to the launch date when that actually goes live. So we've got the formatted manuscript has literally arrived in my inbox this morning, so I've got the job of proofreading that and just making sure we've got the Kindle accounts all set up, the Amazon accounts all set up, so we're just waiting really to do some promotional work to ensure that we've got #1 bestseller status for that book.
Incredible.
Raise my profile, and obviously the key behind this though is not so much about me. People talk about your reason why. I just love helping other people to succeed, and if I can help even one person break through that limiting belief and help them to get on the thing, you know, then I'm a happy man. And I'm hoping, well, I'm sure that book will be able to change people's perception of the fact that it is possible, that people are doing it, there's plenty of money out there, and it's just about the right approach and breaking down those limiting beliefs.
That's great. Well, I'm really glad to have you on here with me. I'm looking forward to spending the evening with you. Have you got any final words of wisdom before we wrap up?
Final words of wisdom. Yeah, I think perseverance is is probably the 5th P. Yeah, there we go. We've created a 5th P. Yeah. You know, this stuff isn't necessarily straightforward and easy, and I think if it was, everybody would be doing it, and actually that would make it even harder. The fact is that there are relatively few people doing it. There are lots of properties out there. There's lots of people with money who'd love a great return on their investment. If you present the right opportunity to them in the right way, and that they resonate with you as an individual, people buy people. It's not so much about the project, it's do they connect with you? And Samuel, people will connect with you because of who you are. People will connect with me for a completely different reason because of who I am. And understanding that we are individual and that we resonate on different frequencies is brilliant, because it means that there isn't a limited pool that we're all fishing from together. And that it is abundant, and that by persevering we can actually break through into that and make real progress.
Brilliant. Tim, thank you ever so much, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Fantastic. Thanks, Samuel. Cheers now.